and the author of multiple books, including The Irresistible Revolution, and most relevant for us this evening, he has co-authored with Mike Martin, Beating Guns, Hopes for People Who Are Weary of Violence. And as Michael Spath mentioned, that book is on sale after our program tonight. His partners in Raw Tools, Mike and his father Fred Martin, we might say their interest in peace building has been forged out of their participation in the Anabaptist Mennonite stream of Christianity, a stream that is committed to the nonviolent way of Jesus Christ. Shortly after the Sandy Hook massacre, Mike had the idea of forging guns into tools. And Shane got wind of this, invited them to an event, and then they realized they needed to learn how to blacksmith first. And so they did. And together Mike is trained in restorative justice facilitation and encourages everyone to explore how they can connect to similar efforts in their community. Mike is licensed for specialized ministry in the Mountain States Mennonite Conference of Mennonite Church USA and blogs at rawtools.org. So Mike, Fred, and Shane, thank you for being here. Thank you for leading us.
All right, let's see here. I'm going to try to, there we go. Hey, Fort Wayne. Are you all Fort Wayne people, or how many people came a little further than that? A few. How many of y'all came more than an hour? Does that happen? Oh, wow, okay. Well, thanks for showing up. This is one of those tours that in some ways you wish you didn't have to do, right? Traveling all over the country talking about gun violence, but I think you're here tonight because you know that we do have to have a conversation around gun violence, that indeed it's a crisis in our country. So thanks for showing up. And we launched this little, you got to settle for me tonight. I don't know if Mike's going to make it or not. He's finding his way from like 3 different airports today, although he does have his priorities set. He went to visit his family for 2 days. So, but this is like our 35th stop or something like that, 33rd stop on this around the country. And I want to tell you first how we caught this vision together. We are both inspired by the biblical prophets Micah and Isaiah, who spoke of God's people beating their swords into plows, their spears into pruning hooks, right? So we love that image of turning our weapons into garden tools. We don't have too many swords in the U.S., but we have a whole lot of guns, and so that's what we started with. And we, about 7 years ago, I had teamed up with my friend Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, who's a good friend to have for many reasons. Fudge brownie's probably my favorite reason. But we had teamed up for an event called Jesus Bombs and Ice Cream, imagining a world with less bombs and more ice cream. And we dropped Ben and Jerry's buckets from the ceiling with helium balloons, and it was a magical night. We're not going to do that tonight, but it's still going to be a magical night. But and one of the things that we did, we were talking about the big violence, the bombs, the military spending, our addiction to this idea that violence can get rid of violence. But we also connected it to guns, and we invited people to donate guns. It's amazing what you can do with Twitter. We are aware that we have more guns than people in the U.S., so we thought there might be some folks wanting to get rid of some guns. So we got our first donated gun 7 years ago was an AK-47. Right, part of the problem, these military-style weapons that are still legal, and we turned it into a shovel and a rake. which was lovely, and you'll see a picture of it later. But what I didn't know was hundreds of miles away in Colorado, Mike and his dad Fred, who's outside, had this similar vision to start Raw Tools, which, if you didn't catch that, it's war flipped backwards, right? Raw Tools. And they also began to take donated guns, and their first gun donated was an AK-47. And so we thought, what better way to launch this tour than by chopping an AK-47 in half? Come on, somebody. So we chopped this AK-47 in half. We've been traveling with it. Tricky to get through airports, but you know. We're going to make kind of a little makeshift altar here, and as we go to the forge in a little bit, you'll be able to see these things. So that symbol of making guns inoperable, that we then are able to repurpose that metal. So Raw Tools can make like 3 plows out of one of those AK-47s and a whole bunch of other cool stuff out of the wood and other pieces. But I wanted to show you a couple other things that we've been traveling with that are important to us. These are a couple of tools that we made similar to the tool that we'll be making tonight. This was the first plow that we made together, Mike and I. And this one was special because it was a Philadelphia gun. This was a handgun that we found in an abandoned house. And that's part of our problem, right? Is we're so saturated with guns that we're trying to turn abandoned houses into affordable housing. It's a beautiful little project that we're doing on the north side of Philly. So my friend went into one of the abandoned houses and was like, whoa, there's like a fully operable handgun like just laying there. So he gave it to us and we heated it up, melted it down, and this is what we made out of it. But it was also special because it was the first time that we kind of felt moved by the Spirit to invite the moms and dads who had lost their kids to take the hammer. And one after another came, and this one mother I will never forget. It's permanently marked my memory that day as Miss Ryan. She's a mother that lost her child in Philly to a stray bullet. And she had a picture of him on her jacket. And as she began to beat with the hammer, the barrel of that gun, with every thump of the hammer, she said, "This is for my boy." And in that moment, we kind of realized that what we're doing tonight is bigger than transforming metal. I mean, we are turning a gun into a plow in Fort Wayne, but we're also giving space for public lament and for grief, to honor people's pain. And there will be a time tonight that those of you who have been directly impacted by gun violence, if you want to, you'll be invited to take the hammer. We won't have time for everybody to, but if you've lost someone close to you, or in one city we had someone that started beating on it, and he beat it 18 times, and afterwards he said, "That was for the 18-year-old who I killed." So people are coming into this from a lot of different spaces, and I'll lay that up here as a reminder of the power of what we're doing tonight, and you can see that as we go out in a little bit. The second plow that I carry everywhere this is the last plow that we made before we hit the road together. This was an AR-15. One of those guns that is designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's exactly what they keep getting used for. Over and over. It is usually the weapon of choice in many of the mass shootings. And so we took one of those AR-15s off the streets of Philadelphia and we turned it into this plow. But it was also a special event because we decided we wanted to do it as a public demonstration, right? So we gathered hundreds of people in downtown Philadelphia and we did it publicly and openly, and we had permits and everything like that, you know. And so someone said, "Is this a protest?" And we said, one of my friends said, "No, we're protestifying. We're declaring how things can be made right again," right? So it was a time of protestifying, but we did dedicate this plow to Senator Pat Toomey, who is our senator, and he's one of those senators that came out strong after Sandy Hook and said, never again. And now he's sort of moved more into the thoughts and prayers camp, if you know what I'm saying. And by that I mean not doing much, you know. And so we delivered this to kind of stir his conscience and his heart. And hundreds of us marched this plow to Senator Toomey asking for a ban on assault weapons. There's a bill that we were looking for him to sign. And we also wanted to give him this plow. He never came. That's why I still have his plow. And but we waited for about 2 hours in the rain. And eventually we were asked to leave, and we said, in all respect, we can't leave as long as these guns are still flowing on our streets. And we turned it into a little pray-in or a sit-in there, you know, and we were arrested, about 40 of us. But as the police were arresting us, they said, we're with you. These guns should not be legal on our streets. They kill police officers too. I did ask them, why are you arresting us then? But anyway, we're taken into custody, and about 3 weeks later, all the charges were dropped. And they said, we knew we were on the right side of history, but it helped not to have a record on that one. And we also are planning a second delivery right now. So anyway, that's Senator Toomey's plow. And, we became convinced that we need to turn up the volume just a little bit, right? That this issue is at a critical breaking point in our country, and that's why we wrote this book. It's why we've been doing this work. And you're going to feel tonight, it's going to start a little heavy, because we want to honor the fact that things are not okay right now. But we're going to move towards the hope. We start with a gun and we end with a plow. So you see where we're going, amen? And I'm going to need you to tap into your inner Pentecostal up here, Fort Wayne, okay? So everybody's got one. Just some of you got to dig a little deep to get there. But it is a hopeful night. It is a hopeful night. Now, there are folks who would say that we don't have a gun problem. We have a heart problem or a sin problem. And what we want to invite you to think about tonight is we have both. We have a heart problem and a gun problem. And God heals hearts and people change laws. And we might need to think in terms of both of those, right? Because the fact is, the sin of violence goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The first thing that happened outside the garden was a brother killing a brother, right? Cain and Abel. And it says that the blood cried out to God from the ground. That God felt that violence and that blood that spilled. And so don't we know that blood is still crying out to God from the land. And as Jesus wept over Jerusalem, certainly Jesus is weeping over America right now. So we start by remembering that, we could get rid of every gun in America and people would still find ways to kill each other. Like, we've seen someone take a pressure cooker and turn it into a bomb in the Boston Marathon, right? We've seen people use a car as a weapon and drive it into crowds to destroy life. So we can find ways to kill each other. And no matter how good our laws are, no law can change a racist heart. We need God to do that, right? No matter how good our laws are, we still need the Spirit of God to heal our hearts of our hatred, our violence. But there are some things that are designed to kill, right? And they make our capacity to take life so much more lethal. And so we do want to recognize the fact that we also have a gun problem in our country. And in order to do that, I'm going to just give you a few reality checks of where we're at in America. And I want to invite you after each of these, if you feel moved, you can say, Lord, have mercy together. All right? Let's try that. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. We have 5% of the world's population in the U.S., but almost half of the world's guns.
Lord, have mercy.
In the U.S., we manufacture 9.5 million guns per year. 26,000 guns per day. That's 18 guns a minute, one gun every 3 seconds. Lord have mercy. In the U.S., there are nearly 5 times more gun dealers than McDonald's restaurants. Lord have mercy. And that is not an argument for more McDonald's. I think you see where we're going on that one. But in the U.S., we actually had to increase our statistics because they kept getting higher. We were originally saying 96 gun deaths a day. There are now, we used the statistic 105. A journalist told me yesterday it's now 109. What we know is that there are over 100 lives lost to guns every day in America. 38,000 lives a year. And that number has not dropped below 32,000 in over 40 years. So what that means is in 2 decades, in 20 years, we have lost more lives to guns in America than in 250 years of foreign wars. More lives domestically than in 250 years of foreign wars. Lord, have mercy. When we think of how people are impacted, almost half of Americans know someone personally who has been shot. Almost half. Lord have mercy. We'll stop the formal Lord have mercy, but you could say it anytime you want, okay? Because you're going to still probably feel like you want to say it from time to time. I want to just peel away a few of the other layers of this. And one of those is suicide. It's not an angle of gun violence that we often think about. We're accustomed to thinking of gun violence as, mass shootings, kids killed on our corners, and all of those are a piece of it. But 2/3 of gun deaths are suicide. And this is why guns are critically important to it, is that they are very effective in taking your own life, right? So almost everybody who attempts suicide with a gun dies, over 90%. But what's also true is that every other method, the opposite is true. Almost everybody survives their first suicide attempt when they use something other than a gun, 90%, right? And they don't go on to take their own life. When you survive your first suicide attempt, 90% of those don't go on to die by suicide. They're able to get help. They're able to rethink maybe the crisis that might have provoked that. So access to guns means more people taking their own lives. And so even if that's an angle through which I think some of us may have been affected. I had an uncle that killed himself with a gun. Maybe you have similar stories. It's become very real. As we travel around our country, many of the guns that we have are suicide guns. The last time they were fired was someone taking their own life. And we had one family that it was a murder-suicide. A husband killed his wife, killed himself, and then the family was left with no parents and a house full of guns. They donated all of those guns in North Carolina. It took us till late in the night to chop them all up because we don't leave with any operable gun. We chop guns up, and it was an act of public grieving with that family, right? So this is also true of military service members. The number one cause of death of military service members is suicide by gun. There are more military folks dying from their own guns than enemy combatant guns. Their suicide rate is twice that of the general population, almost 1 per hour. And we've had a number of them coming and donating their guns or guns of friends of theirs who took their own lives. So we remember those. We remember police officers, 90% of whom are killed with guns when they're killed in the line of duty. We still have guns in this country, bullets in this country that are designed to pierce through body armor, bulletproof jackets, and they are legal. So many police officers have taken the hammer to the guns, and they grieve the crisis of gun violence in our country. There are also people whose lives have been taken by police officers. When you have more guns than people, police officers are often quick to draw their guns. And in Cleveland, in just a day or two, we will be with Tommy Rice's family as he was 14 years old when a police officer took his life. So we remember all the different kind of angles that gun violence has affected our communities. And we think of our kids. We've been privileged to join around the country young people who are waking our country up, right? From the Parkland kids to the Black Lives Matter movement. They are fed up. And the adults have failed our young people, and so they are rising up. And we are impressed by all over this country the young people that have said enough. We had one young person that they were doing a shooter drill in their school, and they asked the kid, what did you do today at school? And he said, we practiced dying. Elementary school kids said, we practiced dying. Lord have mercy, right? So the number 2 cause of death of our children, our youth and kids, is guns. Number 2. It's number 1 for African American kids, who are 10 times more likely to die than white kids by gun. So we think of those young people, and after Sandy Hook, something happened, right? 20 kids were massacred, 6 adults with them, and our nation kind of rose up and said, never again. And yet it happened again and again and again. Almost 2,000 mass shootings since Sandy Hook. So we see your presence here tonight as saying that when we said enough, we meant enough, right? We are going to take action. And one of the things that happened on this tour was when we were a few days into it, the tragedy in New Zealand happened, right? And so for several nights, we beat 51 times on the barrel of a gun to remember the 51 lives that were lost in New Zealand. And we carried that with us. But then within days, we watched a country rise to the occasion and take responsibility, right? So like within a week, they said we don't need military-style weapons on our streets any more than we need grenades here. And they didn't just look at the guns, they also looked at the heart problem. And they addressed the racism, the hatred, the Islamophobia that targeted that Muslim community. And so thank God for what's happening in New Zealand, right? Maybe they can inspire us that change can happen. So as we continue to think a bit about this, there's one other piece of this that is so important, is that there's a form of gun violence that is an expression of our masculine culture that has been marketed to men from the very beginning. From the very beginning of guns, they were marketed especially to men as a rite of passage and a sign of power, a way to protect your family, all these kind of ways that they were brought to us. But what we know now is that 85% of murders are committed by men. 85%. So I'm not throwing this all under the bus, but I'm saying there is this sort of exercising of that violence that we need to deal with as the men. And when it comes to domestic violence, is often an indicator of what will become domestic homicide, or someone that abuses at home will often create violence in public, in a different space. And a gun in the home makes a woman 5 times more likely when she's abused to actually become a victim of homicide. So as we think of domestic violence and the way that that's played, and the fact that the domestic abusers can still acquire weapons even when they've been convicted of such crimes, is a part of our problem, right? So, and we're also encouraged because women have been a part of the resistance from the beginning. Some of the earliest gun marketers said, I could sell a gun to every boy and young man in America if it weren't for their mothers. So